Hey everyone, welcome back to Gaming Gig. Today we're going to take a look at WarioWare Move It. This is a game that's packed with motion-controlled minigames and lots of chaotic energy. Now we were particularly drawn to this one because you can play through the entire story mode in local co-op. But here's the big question, is this game worth getting to play in co-op, or is it just too chaotic? Well, I played it with my wife to see how it holds up, and in this video we'll break it all down, so let's dive in.
Watch out!
Before we dig into the gameplay, let's take just a second to see where Move It fits into the WarioWare series as a whole. The franchise kicked off on the Game Boy Advance in 2003 with WarioWare Mega Microgames, and from the very start it's been all about frantic, lightning-fast challenges that are as absurd as they are fun. Over the years, the WarioWare games have experimented with all kinds of control schemes, touch controls on the DS with Touched, and motion controls on the Wii with Smooth Moves. Each game in the series brings something new and has its own gimmick, but they more or less always stay true to the core idea of microgames that are super short, ridiculous, and unpredictable. The newest game that we're looking at today, Move It, clearly takes inspiration from Smooth Moves, bringing motion controls back into the spotlight. But even if you're like me and you haven't played every entry in the series, you shouldn't worry. You don't need any previous knowledge of the past games. You can just jump in and start having fun. Alright, so let's talk about how Move It plays. The entire game revolves around motion controls, with the Joy-Con taking center stage. When playing, you'll be striking goofy poses, squatting, pointing. It's purposely designed to make you feel ridiculous, but in a fun way. It's undeniably WarioWare. It's fast, weird, and you just have to embrace the absurdity. The real challenge is figuring out what the game wants you to do in just a couple of seconds. The microgames come at you fast, and the pressure to react in time keeps the energy high. But here's the thing, the game purposely doesn't do a great job of telling you what you're supposed to do. You often only get a single word of instruction, and you're left scrambling to interpret it before the time runs out. It's all just part of the fun, but at times it can be a little frustrating, especially when you fail, but you aren't sure why. What's even more annoying is when you know exactly what you're supposed to do, and you perform the action exactly like the game wants you to, but you still fail. This happens because the game can't always accurately track the motion of the Joy-Con. But you really can't blame this game in particular though, because this really is just a Joy-Con issue. The Joy-Con have gyroscopes and their motion can be somewhat tracked, but it just isn't as precise as something like the pointer controls on the Wii. It's a different technology, and although the technology in the Joy-Con is impressive in its own way, it just isn't as precise when it comes to tracking motion. If you've ever played a game on the Switch where you have to use the Joy-Con as a pointer, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It technically works, but it just isn't super precise, and occasionally the tracking gets all wonky. When you're playing super fast microgames like what's here in Move It, you just inevitably run into situations where the Joy-Con aren't tracked properly, and although you're doing exactly what the game wants you to do, it just isn't able to tell that you're doing it correctly. So there definitely are some small technical issues, but usually it works as intended, and the variety of games you get to play is super impressive. With over 200 microgames, the sheer number of different gameplay scenarios keeps things extremely fresh. There's never a dull moment when you're playing, but the game does lead hard into randomness, and that can make it feel chaotic in ways that may not be enjoyable for everyone. We play the game entirely in co-op, and when playing in co-op, the game splits things up in a couple different ways. Sometimes you and your partner take turns tackling the microgames. One person goes, then the other. On those turns, if one of you fails, the other gets a shot to sort of bail them out and keep the game going without losing a point. It's super clever. Other times, microgames will require both players to work together, which can be a lot of fun, or a little frustrating depending on how well you can coordinate. For me, co-op was the only way that I wanted to experience this game. It's not the kind of thing that I would typically play solo on my own, so honestly, I probably would have just skipped it if it hadn't have been for this co-op mode. The appeal for me was sharing the absurdity and the laughs, and the game definitely delivers on making that shared experience enjoyable. But I will warn you that this is not a game for winding down at the end of the day. That's the time when my wife and I usually play games together, but this just isn't a right before bed kind of game. I mean, admittedly, we're not as young and as spry as we used to be, so this may just be an us thing, but we found that this game worked better as sort of a midday thing when we had more energy. But one thing that can be appreciated no matter what time of day it is this game's presentation. The visuals are bold, vibrant, and look fantastic on the Switch, which isn't always known for the sharpest graphics. These aren't hyper-realistic visuals, far from it, but the art really does look awesome. Every character and background is clean and polished. On top of that, each microgame has its own design and aesthetic. They're all very different, and you're in and out of them so quickly it makes for a very visually engaging experience. My favorite microgames were the ones that reference other games from Nintendo's history. There's everything from OG Mario Brothers to Ocarina of Time, and even some more lesser-known franchises like Pilot Wings. These levels are like little winks to longtime fans, adding a layer of nostalgia that makes the game feel extra rewarding for those of us who grew up playing Nintendo games. The music and sound effects are just as chaotic as the gameplay is. The tempo ramps up as the microgames get faster, and it adds even more tension to the experience. It's really just all done super well. Nothing's pushing boundaries or setting the state of the art, but there's no denying that this game looks and sounds great for what it is. Like I said earlier, Move It is a clear throwback to smooth moves on the Wii, but as someone who has only played the WarioWare games that are on the Switch, I can't help but compare this game to the only other WarioWare game on the console, which is Get It Together. The biggest difference between these two comes down to how you interact with the games. Get It Together didn't really utilize the Joy-Con or motion controls. Instead, it featured a ton of different playable characters. Each one had a unique ability that added a layer of strategy as well as variety. Playing the microgames, you weren't just reacting, you also had to think about how each character's ability worked in the context of that particular microgame. It made the gameplay super dynamic and very replayable. It's not that Get It Together wasn't also very chaotic, it absolutely was, but because you were interfacing with the game through traditional controllers and not motion controls, it gave this game a very different vibe. In contrast, with Move It, you're actively moving your body to match the prompts, which makes it more demanding and somewhat exhausting, especially for us slightly older gamers. Comparing the two games, I found Get It Together to be easier to enjoy for longer sessions. It just has a comparatively much more laid-back approach. That's not to say that Move It isn't fun, it absolutely is. It's just a very different feeling game. If you like motion controls, it's the game for you. But if you're looking for a more traditional controller-based experience, the previous WarioWare game, Get It Together, may be the better choice, and it also has full co-op support. At the end of the day, WarioWare Move It is all about embracing the chaos. Whether that chaos works for you might just depend on you. As a co-op game, it's lots of fun in short bursts, but the intensity and the physicality of the motion controls can make it a bit much if you're hoping for something a little more laid back. My wife and I are both in our 30s, and we might just not be the target demographic for this game. It's high energy, very over the top, and feels more suited for a younger audience or maybe a group of friends at a party. For us, it was still very enjoyable, but we typically look for games that are just a little less involved, physically at least. So to answer the question, is this game worth picking up to play in co-op, or is it too chaotic? Honestly, it might be a little bit of both, but personally, I think that it's worth picking up to play in co-op, especially if you already have the suspicion that you will like this kind of game. There are definitely moments where the chaos makes things hilarious and memorable, but there are also times where it can feel a little frustrating or even a little overwhelming, especially if you're not in the mood for all the flailing and frantic energy. For us, it was a fun experience that we're glad we played, but it's maybe not a game that we're super likely to revisit all that often. The co-op aspects are really well implemented though, so if you like motion controls and games that don't take themselves too seriously, Move It is definitely worth a try. But if you're someone who prefers co-op games that are more relaxing or strategic, this one might not quite hit the mark. Either way though, it's a wild ride that only WarioWare can deliver. Finally, if you're here because you just want co-op game recommendations, you might want to check out the last game I reviewed, Fogs. It's also on Switch, but also PC, Xbox, and PlayStation. Also, I recently put together a short form video where I count down the top 10 co-op games that we played together in 2024, and I don't want to spoil anything, but Fogs is definitely on that list. So if you just want some quick co-op game recommendations, check out that video. But otherwise, I'll let you go there. Thanks for watching all the way to the end. It really helps me so much. I'm Randy from Gaming Gig, and I'll see you next time.